Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford. I'm an Old Norse specialist currently teaching at the University of California, Berkeley, previously at UCLA, and very happy to report that as of August 2017, I'll be starting at the University of Colorado, Boulder. I'm back today with another one of my videos about a topic in Norse language and myth, and today I'll be discussing the Mead of poetry from Norse mythology, Óðrerir. Now, as usual, I'm going to be basing my discussion on the two most reliable texts that we have in Old Norse about pre-Christian mythology, and these are two books called Edda, written in Iceland in the 1200s. One, the Poetic Edda, is a compilation of about 30 poems written down in the 1200s, but many of which were composed orally many centuries earlier. This is available in a new translation by me that I hope that you'll check out if you haven't yet. There is also the Prose Edda, which is the work of the Icelandic chieftain and scholar Snorri Sturluson. He was attempting to preserve what he could of the myths in order to help people compose skaldic poetry. His account is in some ways less archaic, if you will, than the Poetic Edda's poems because he's trying to make one cohesive story out of them, but he often remembers details that the Poetic Edda only hints at. So sometimes the only cohesive version of a story that we have is from Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda. If you haven't seen it yet, I have a video about the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda and their value as sources. I'll link that in an annotation and in the video description below. Now, the story of how Óðrerir was gained by Odin, the god of wisdom and poetry, is told only in hints in the Poetic Edda. In the poem Hofamál, which I have a separate video about that I'll link, Odin talks about how he tunneled using something called Rati's tusk to retrieve Óðrerir from a woman named Gunnlóð. He seems to have seduced her and then been pursued by her father named Suttungr, and to have betrayed Suttungr in some way. But from these hints, it would be very difficult for us to construct an entire narrative. It is only in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda and the part called Skóldskaparmál, the matter of poetry, that Snorri gives any kind of detailed version of the tale. And in this tale, we hear that after the Æsir and the Vanir, the main families of gods, had had a war, they agreed to make peace, and as a symbol of their peace, they all spat into a cauldron. From this cauldron, the gods then made a man named Kvasir. Kvasir was so wise that he could answer any question, so he spent his time wandering the world, answering people's questions, and dispensing wisdom. But he was killed for unspecified reasons by two dwarves named Fjalar and Galar. These dwarves took his blood, poured it into 3 different containers, and mixed it with honey to make the mead Óðrerir. Óðrerir is also the name of one of the containers, but it was probably originally the name of the mead. The name Óðrerir, you may notice, contains the same element the name Odin does. Óðr is a root for mad or passion or fury or even possession. Rerir means mover, so this is the mover to passion, the mover to madness, which makes sense for both an alcoholic beverage and especially an alcoholic beverage associated with an excited, ecstatic state of composing poetry. After Fjalar and Galar have killed Kvasir and made Óðrerir from his blood, they also kill a giant man and a giant woman for reasons that are too secondary to get into here. And then that couple's son, the giant Suttungr, comes and tortures Fjalar and Galar and demands the mead Óðrerir as compensation for his parents' deaths. Now, he takes that mead in its 3 containers and hides it inside of a mountain named Hnitbjörg, guarded by his daughter Gunnlóð. Now, at this time, Odin desires the mead, and he goes down to apparently Jotunheimr, where we can assume this is happening because Suttungr and his daughter are giants, they're Jotnar. He goes in disguise under the name of Bolverker, literally evildoer. And he comes to 9 slaves working in a field. They're mowing using scythes. And he goes up to them and he has an excellent whetstone and he whets or sharpens their scythes. And the slaves are all so impressed by this that they ask him, by this whetstone, that they ask him for the whetstone. And he says, well, effectively, whoever is still standing when this hits the ground can have it. He throws it up in the air. The 9 slaves kill each other with their newly sharpened scythes. Odin or Bolverkr catches his whetstone and whistles along. And he comes to the home of Baugi, who is the brother of Suttungr. And Odin or Bolverkr tells Baugi that he's lost his 9 farm slaves and he needs workers, so Bolverkr says he'll do the work of 9 men for the summer if Baugi will agree to help him get a drink of Óðrerir from his brother Suttungr. Baugi agrees. Odin does the work of the 9 men for the summer, and then Baugi goes to Suttungr and asks him for some of the mead for his farmhand Bolverkr. Suttungr refuses, so Odin and Baugi have to try something else, and they attempt to tunnel under the mountain Hnitbjörg with a drill called Rati or Rati's tusk. So they drill a small hole through so they can peer into the chamber where Gunnlod is with the 3 containers of mead. And Odin then turns into a snake to slither through this hole and get into the chamber. But Baugi apparently changes his mind about him and tries to stab him while he's crawling through, so that way back out is closed to Odin. Odin then has to agree to spend 3 nights with Gunnlod in exchange for 3 drinks of the mead. He seems to very happily agree to this, and based on the hint in Hávamál that he gives about his well-bought looks, he may have somehow disguised himself as more handsome or something to seduce Gunnlod. But after his 3 nights with her, he takes his 3 drinks of the mead, and in each drink he drains 1 whole container. So Odin has now consumed the entirety of Óðrerir. He then turns himself into an eagle to fly out of this chamber in the mountain and starts flying toward Óðrerir, the enclosure where the gods live. Suttungr then turns into an eagle to chase after him. Odin turns his head back to look, and he's frightened seeing Suttungr pursuing him so closely, and so he defecates some of the mead out in his fear. And that part of the mead that Odin defecated out is called, Snorri says, Skoldfíflahlutur, the portion for poet fools, the portion for bad poets. So you can say in Old Norse that someone who's drunk eagle feces is a poor poet. Well, anyway, Odin gets to Óðrerir, where he is able to vomit the rest of Óðrerir into a cauldron that the gods had prepared, and in that way he gets Óðrerir for the gods rather than for their enemies, the giants. And then, according to Hávamál, Suttungr comes to Óðrerir after this and asks about Bolverkr, and Odin says, oh, well, he's not here. And of course, this is the famous spot where Odin says in stanza 110 of Hávamál, I believe that Odin swore an oath to them, but who can trust Odin? He left Suttung deceived in his own home, and he left Gunnlod weeping. And that's the story of how the mead of poetry was brought into the realm of the gods, and from there shared by them with human beings. I hope that you'll check out my translation of the Poetic Edda if you haven't yet, and also my video on Hávamál, which talks a little bit more about this story as it's told in Hávamál. And I'll point out that I make all of this information available for free on my YouTube channel because I don't think that information does anyone any good locked behind an ivory tower or archaic language. But I do have a Patreon page if you'd like to help me keep this video series going, and I do have what I think are some pretty cool rewards for patrons. Now, I will wish you all the best.